But what about when survival and economics are tied to the successful propagation of an idea? Welcome to Ostracon, a podcast that translates fragments into the whole from which they came. So here's a question. What happens when ideas become monetizable? And I'm not talking about, I have a great idea about how to make something, I'm going to patent it, and I'm going to make a living out of it. That's not what I mean. I mean when the idea itself, the ideology, maybe even, but the pure perspective or vision or outlook, when that itself becomes monetizable because an economy or technology or something has changed such that there's a niche where someone can survive by propagating a pure idea. What does that do, if anything? Does it change the way we communicate? You can think of classic organic situations of idea sharing. The mother or father that comes home from a long day of work and plays their instrument or sings to their children, just simply to share something that is beautiful. Or a group of friends at a cafe, a group of family around a table at the holidays, everyone sharing their thoughts, their perspectives. Maybe there's some good-willed disagreement, and there's a general desire to understand personally what's the right way to think about this. The primary goal is personal enrichment, personal development, understanding, clarity, and there are good downstream results that come of all those things. But the specter of money is not in the room. And by the way, these examples don't have to be domestic. I mean, you can think even of the founders of political movements who had absolutely nothing to gain. In fact, maybe had everything to lose. And so there was no economic component to what they were doing. If we're just thinking about what satisfies us rationally or reasonably, then there's not an economic incentive to go farther once you have been satisfied. Of course, your ideas may change over time as you encounter new things and new experiences, but not for monetary reasons. After all, you've got a day job. But what about when survival and economics are tied to the successful propagation of an idea? Does that alter the parameters from the simple requirement that an idea convince us that it is true and rational? For example, would there be an incentive to always go further, to carry an idea to higher and higher amplitudes, or with less and less compromise? Has it always been this way, or have economies, technology, prosperity, other circumstances changed things so that now pure ideas or even advocacy are more monetizable than ever before? I mean, there's always been a double layer, you might say, in the world of ideas. Those individuals who are convinced that an idea is true and have amended their lives accordingly, or maybe they haven't acted on it, but they're convinced of the idea nonetheless, even if they have some hesitancy. But then above that is the level of those individuals and actors who are working in the world to try and convince everyone else to accept an idea. I suppose that's always existed, but maybe this question is, has there been a discernible or even a dramatic difference in the power or efficacy of that higher level? And what does it do to the way that we talk about ideas, to our openness, to the credibility of others, to the possibilities for discourse? Is it democratizing? Does it mean that there's a greater possibility for more voices to be heard. One risk of the insular examples that we sort of rattled off a moment ago is that because they are so self-contained, they might get stuck in an incomplete or even a false idea because of lack of access to more complete thinking. The creation of a platform where there's an economic benefit and incentive to sharing good ideas might be an antidote. On the other hand, is it designed to be divisive because of the way that ideas are more successfully sold, or what makes a more sellable idea? Does it create platforms for ideas that organically never would have gotten off the ground? When thinking about any of these questions, consider that history is full of the widespread propagation of bad ideas. Is this question just another way of examining Foucault's contentions about knowledge and power, that knowledge, quote unquote, need not necessarily be true, but is shaped and deployed by sources of power for the purpose of reinforcing those sources? Is this not a question of power, but a question of discourse, the exchange of ideas? I mean, on the one hand, if Foucault is right about the relationship between quote-unquote knowledge and power, then one would expect it to influence discourse. Maybe this question is a little bit different, whether or not the monetization of ideas and their propagation, maybe the monetization of ideology, has an effect on the reliability of discourse, its effectiveness, its credibility. Consider it this way. If the goal is to find a truth, if there is a truth and it is in fact seekable and findable, then are these separate considerations in that search? The first being that the ideas we encounter may be influenced by sources of power. The second being that the ideas we may encounter may be influenced by their ability to be monetized. Money itself isn't an entity, isn't a power. It's something possessed by or deployed by power. You could have somebody powerless, but who is seeking power through the propagation of an idea. But then again, and maybe at a deeper level, what is the quote-unquote knowledge? What is the influence that has caused that individual to prioritize above the truth of the idea its ability to be monetized? Is that in and of itself the results of an exercise of power? At the bottom, is all of this just a question of whether or not each of us is directed towards the transcendent or is influenced by the gravity of the world pulling us toward non-transcendent worldly things? The idea of having discourse when we're all pulled in opposite directions is one of the oldest ideas around. It's the idea straight out of the gospel of being in the world but not of the world. Here's another way that you could think about this relationship of ideas. Would the ideas that are most monetizable, whatever that may be, also be the ideas that would be most likely to flourish and to continue to assert themselves or impress themselves on the largest number of people? In Foucault's knowledge-power relationship, that would always be the intent of power's use of quote-unquote knowledge. But we're asking here, has something changed in the informational ecosystem that makes that more viable? Has something changed that allows the greater monetization of an idea for the sake of reinforcing its source? And what's the reason for the caricature that every generation seems to think that the succeeding generation is more materialistic? Is that real or is that an illusion? Certainly the Romans could have been every bit as hedonistic or more as somebody with an iPad. At the same time, is something changing? Are the lures to a preoccupation with the world changing, developing? Are new modes of discourse and their monetizability part of this change? And let me ask you this: is materialism the most monetizable ideology? Has it always been the case that those most rooted in the world are most likely to have success in the world and then are most capable to propagate an attraction to the world? And by the way, just because somebody puts the name Jesus on something, it doesn't mean it's not material. But can we turn on its head this idea of the world as material only? There's great beauty in the world, but that beauty points to something transcendent and eternal. The beauty can't be loved for the sake of what is destined to perish, but what lives, that to which all beauty comes from and points to. And don't we all long for the highest form of our own existence? Don't we all long to be outside of the tyranny of loss and contingency? Don't those ideas have a broader appeal than the material, especially given the long arc of humanity's search in all times and places for something above the material? But on the other hand, do they fit into an ecosystem of information that is driven by monetization, when the idea itself is to not be identified by that metric? Let's return to the domestic. Does all of this lead us to form ourselves in the context of our relationships with those we love, with our friends and our family, those relationships that are not dependent on any form of material success, but are dependent on love? Is it in those relationships where we orient ourselves to the true, the good, and the beautiful, creating identities that can thrive, grow, and engage with an information ecosystem, whatever may be driving it? Is this a time for a return to personal relationship, relationships of trust, platforms that do not need money to survive?